The Standard Edition of the Complete Psychological Works of Sigmund Freud, Volume 1. Notes on some technical terms whose translation calls for comment. Abwehr. I have accepted the established translation defense, though this gives a more passive impression than the German. The true sense is given better by to fend off, which I have used for the cognate verbal form abwehren. Affect, Empfindung, Gefühl. These three words have different meanings when they are used strictly. Affect, not an everyday English word, sensation, and feeling, or emotion. The trouble here is that all these words in both languages cover very uncertain ground, and that the meanings of the German and English words do not coincide but overlap. In particular, the German Empfindung can represent both sensation and feeling in English. Inquirers may be referred to the two main passages where these difficulties arise. In Section 3 of the Metapsychological Paper on the Unconscious, Standard Edition, Volume 14, pages 177 through 8, General Works, Volume 10, 275 through 7, and in Lecture 25 of the Introductory Lectures, Standard Edition, Volume 16, page 395, or General Works, Volume 11, page 410. In these passages, and especially in the second one, it seems necessary to translate Empfindung by feeling. Similarly, at the beginning of Chapter 8 of Inhibition, Symptoms, and Anxiety, Standard Edition, Volume 20, page 132, and General Works, Volume 14, page 162. But if so, Gefühl in these same passages cannot be translated feeling. I have therefore rendered it by emotion instead. That Freud himself had flexible views on the use of these words is shown, among other things, by the fact that in his early French paper on obsessions and phobias, he regularly uses état émotif as equivalent to the German affect, e.g., General Works, Volume 1, page 346. Angst. Anxiety is the conventional translation of the term. This is discussed in a special editor's appendix to Freud's first paper on anxiety neurosis, in Standard Edition, Volume 3, page 116. Anlehnung Stippus, anaclitic or attachment type of object choice. This term is discussed in an editor's footnote to the paper on narcissism, Standard Edition, 14, 87 note. Besitzung, cathexis. The origin of this term is explained in a footnote to the editor's appendix to the first paper on the neuropsychoses of defense, Standard Edition, Volume 3, page 63, note. Instance, agency. The German term seems to have made its first appearance in Chapter 4 of the Interpretation of Dreams, General Works, Volumes 2 through 3, page 149. Also Standard Edition, Volume 4, page 144. There, and in many other places in the same work, instance is equated with system. It seems probable that Freud derived the metaphor from legal terminology, where it refers to the power or jurisdiction of a court, or more loosely, to the court itself. Actually, as is shown by the Oxford Dictionary, a similar usage of the word instance exists in English. It has become almost obsolete, however, except in the one phrase, a court of first instance. The English word has, on the other hand, a multiplicity of common modern usages, and as a translation of instance could lead to nothing but confusion. Hence, I have introduced the indeterminate word agency, which seems to cover the essence of the German concept. Fantasy. Fantasy. The spelling of this word causes a good deal of annoyance. The PH form is adopted here on the basis of a discussion in the large Oxford Dictionary under fantasy with an F, which includes, in modern use, F fantasy and PH fantasy, in spite of their identity in sound and in ultimate etymology, tend to be apprehended as separate words, the predominant sense of the former, the F fantasy, being caprice, whim, fanciful invention. while that of the latter, PH fantasy, is imagination, visionary notion. Accordingly, the PH form is used here for the technical psychological phenomenon, but the F form is also used on appropriate occasions. See, for instance, Standard Edition, Volume 17, pages 227 and 230. Psyche, psychisch, seal or selinleben, seelish, translated as psyche, psychical, mind, mental. Though I have as a rule used the English equivalent forms, I believe that Freud uses the two alternatives as precise synonyms. This is shown in many instances, in many places. For instance, in Chapter 7b of the Interpretation of Dreams, though psychischer Apparat is more common, seelischer Apparat occurs more than once. General Works, Volumes 2 through 3, pages 541 through 3, and Standard Edition, Volume 5, pages 536 through 8. So too in the first of the introductory lectures, General Work, Volume 11, pages 14 through 15, or Standard Edition, Volume 16, pages 21 through 2. Psychisch and seelish are constantly used interchangeably, and indeed at the beginning of his contribution to Die Gesunderheit, General Works, Volume 5, page 290, or Standard Edition, Volume 7, page 283, he explicitly asserted the synonymous character of the two terms. Trieb, instinct. My choice of this rendering has been attacked in some quarters with considerable, but I think mistaken severity. The term almost invariably proposed by critics as an alternative is drive. There are several objections to this. First, I should like to remark that drive, used in this sense, is not an English word, and as I have explained in my preface, this translation aims at being a translation into English. This use of the word drive is not to be found in the large Oxford Dictionary, or in its first supplement of 1933, though this was sufficiently up to date to include cathexis. And it will not be found in any of the regular English textbooks of psychology. The critics obviously choose it because of its superficial resemblance to the German Trieb, and I suspect that the majority of them are in fact influenced by a native or early familiarity with the German language. It would, however, be absurd to reject the word on that account, if its introduction promised to result in substantial gains. There seems little doubt that from the standpoint of modern biology, Freud used the word Trieb to cover a variety of different concepts. The number of terms now employed in this connection to denote an equally numerous assembly of distinct but related notions is clearly shown in a contribution of some 25 pages by R.A. Hind on some recent trends in ethology in Volume 2 of Koch's Psychology, A Study of Science, New York, 1959. In the course of his elaborate analysis, he shows that the word drive itself is used, quote, used in at least three ways, end quote, page 585. It requires, I think, a very brave man seriously to argue that rendering Freud's Trieb by drive clears up the situation. It is not the business of a translator to attempt to classify and distinguish between Freud's different uses of the word. This job can safely be left to the reader, provided only that the same English word is invariably used for the German original. Incidentally, Freud himself explains pretty clearly what he means by it in one, at least, of its senses at the beginning of his metapsychological paper on Trieb und Triebschicksal, General Werks, Volume 10, page 211, footnote, and Standard Edition, Volume 14, page 118, footnote. The only rational thing to do in such a case seems to me to be to choose an obviously vague and indeterminate word and stick to it. Hence my choice of instinct. The only slight complication is that in some half-dozen instances, Freud himself uses the German instinct, always perhaps in the sense of instinct in animals. Footnote 1. Though in one of these instances at least, in a letter to Fleece, number 71 of October 15, 1897, page 266 below, he uses instinct as an apparently complete synonym for Trieb in a human being. In every such case, however, attention has been drawn to this fact in a footnote. Another consideration, comparatively unimportant except to a translator, is the impossibility of finding an adjectival form for drive. How do the critics propose to translate Triebregung? I have seen it given as instinctual drive, which is a mistranslation as well as a surrender. Drive impulse? I confess to preferring my own instinctual impulse. Unbewusst, unconscious. Some discussion of the translation of this term appears in a footnote to the editor's note to The Unconscious, Standard Edition, Volume 14, page 165, note. Unlust, unpleasure. Here the critics come from this side of the ocean, and it is they who declare that this is not an English word. Earlier editors gave way to these cries and, in the collected papers, for instance, translated smears by pain and unlust by pain in inverted commas. The reductio ad absurdum of this subterfuge was the passage in Mourning and Melancholia, General Werk, Volume 10, page 430, and Standard Edition, Volume 14, page 245, where we find Smersenlust, which would have to be translated pain, pain. Fortunately, the Oxford Dictionary comes to our help once more, this time in the opposite direction, for it tells us that unpleasure was used by the poet Coleridge in 1814, a revelation by which, no doubt, everyone will be satisfied. I have invariably translated unlust by unpleasure, smerz by pain, and peinlich by distressing.